Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of May the 31st and June the 1st, 2025. Now, I'd like to start by thanking everyone for not just subscribing to my channel, but also for all their birthday wishes. I did make a big thing about it being my birthday in my last video, so I was kind of encouraging people to wish me happy birthday. And so, yeah, a lot of people wish me happy birthday, and I really thank you for all your good wishes. You know, I really appreciate the support and the comments, and I'm very grateful for all of that. Now, as far as this video is concerned, I, of course, want to talk about the weekend. I also want to go back to the theme of Brigitte Macron. Now, a few videos ago, I did talk about her, and I looked at the comments, and now there was some criticism here that I received. You know, there is a theory that, of course, that Brigitte Macron is a man, and there was a video or a series of videos by Candace Owens that was put out talking about, you know, some theories about Brigitte Macron. And, you know, I am a fairly naive person. I really am. I tend not to believe in conspiracy theories. I'm not saying that I don't believe that any conspiracy theories ever prove true. I think if you want to have an example of how the mainstream media can lie, a perfect example is the war in Ukraine and how that is being reported, not just in terms of how the war is going, but also in terms of the relative blame. And so, you know, I didn't really believe in conspiracy theories until the war in Ukraine. But as far as Brigitte Macron is concerned, you know, I do take a fairly mainstream view of her, and I'm not really into conspiracy theories, as I've just said. But still, I thought it would be a good idea to have another look at her chart. And I also wanted to look at the chart of Candace Owens. And of course, Candace Owens had a series of videos about Brigitte Macron, and so I hadn't really looked at Candace Owens for some time. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to have another look at her horoscope. And additionally, I want to consider the horoscope of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi war criminal. I do look at his horoscope every now and then. And the reason I want to look at his chart is that, you know, I always wondered, you know, at the time of my birthday, you know, what was actually going on when I was born, you know, May the 30th, 1962. And there aren't many big events on my birthday. Except just after my birthday, Adolf Eichmann was hanged. He was hanged, I think, local time in Israel on June the 1st, the first few minutes of June the 1st, European time. I think it would be May the 31st. And so Adolf Eichmann, if you don't know, he was a Nazi war criminal. He fled to Argentina. He had just his ordinary, boring life in Argentina. Then the Israeli intelligence kidnapped him in 1960. They took him back to Israel. They put him on trial. They found him guilty, and then they hanged him. And he was hanged exactly 63 years ago. And I want to look at his chart because it is quite informative. It tells us something about death, it tells us something about relocation, and it also tells us something about solar returns. And it's a counterexample of my view of solar returns. So as far as solar returns are concerned, I like to do my solar returns based on the place someone was born, and I don't generally use solar returns based on where someone was at the time of a big event. And Adolf Eichmann's horoscope is just a good example of using the place where someone is at the time of their solar return rather than, you know, where they were when they were born. But so I'll be looking at all of that at the end of the video. So let me now consider the weekend. This is a weekend of May the 31st and June the 1st. You know, by the way, as usual, if you happen to, you know, like this video. Don't forget to press the like button, and if you're not subscribed, I would of course be very grateful to have you as a subscriber. So here is the chart for today, the weekend. I've set it for midnight, June the 1st. So really, I've set it for the beginning of the month, New York time, because the weekend straddles the end of May, beginning of June, and so here is the picture, and the moon is in Leo, and the moon is really in Leo for the whole weekend. If you are in the Americas, then very, very late in the weekend, the moon moves into Virgo. I mean, when does the moon move into Virgo? The moon moves into Virgo at if you're in New York, it would move into Virgo at 10 p.m. on Sunday. That would be 7 p.m. on Sunday if you're in California. But so basically, I'm regarding it as a moon in Leo weekend. So that kind of makes things simple. And so the moon in Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto at the beginning of a weekend, just as it moves into Leo right at the beginning. Then it makes a sextile to the Sun and a sextile to Mercury. Again, this is all on Saturday. And so as far as actual mainstream aspects are concerned, on Saturday there isn't a huge amount going on. Because there's the Sun and Mercury, so the Moon sort of does make the sextile between those two planets. I think that those sextiles are certainly fortunate, particularly that Moon sextile Sun. I do like sextiles between the Moon and Sun. They represent things working easily. There's something very harmonious about Moon in Leo, Sun in Gemini. It's a time when just things run smoothly. It's not, in this case, an especially emotional aspect because Moon is in a fire sign, Leo, Sun is in Gemini, which is an air sign. So it's not super emotional, but at the same time it is about harmony and it is about getting on with people. And Moon sextile Mercury means that we should be able to articulate ourselves pretty well. And then the moon moves on, and it does make a conjunction to Mars, and then a trine to Venus, and then a square to Uranus. So Sunday, June the 1st, probably a more active day than Friday. And you could say that Moon-Mars conjunction is important, and Moon-Mars conjunctions can, in certain cases, be angry, particularly when it's in Leo. Some people have a high belief in themselves and want support and appreciation and even admiration. And while that's going on, Jupiter and Uranus are making a semi-sextile. So there is Jupiter, 28 Gemini, Uranus, 28 Taurus, so they're 30 degrees apart. And Jupiter-Uranus semi-sextile, well, in general, that could be just about wanting freedom. I mean, that's a very simple way of looking at Jupiter semi-sextile Uranus. You might also say that, well, Jupiter in Gemini wants to do things, has ideas, and wants to be fairly easygoing about it, Jupiter in Gemini. But Uranus is about a stubbornness, someone holding something back. So in terms of how we seek our freedom, there may be something uneasy about it and even clumsy. And so, if you feel you want to, take sort of dramatic initiatives over the weekend, you really want to express yourself, then, try to be a little subtle if you can. I mean, subtlety can be a problem. I mean, because today, this weekend is very, very positive. I mean, it's positive because all of the 7 planets, all the 7 traditional planets, are in fire or air signs. And so it's a bit over the top. And when you've got all that positivity, there isn't much sensitivity, almost by definition. We just want to be active and there might be a lack of reflection, and that might be about the times we are living. Sometimes you might think the fire and air signs are more exciting, more interesting than the earth and water signs, but sometimes you need reflection. And just because you've got a lot of fire and air around, it doesn't mean it's original, because there can be a lack of reflection, and that can perhaps be a problem of just being, too positive, having too much yang and not enough yin. I think I've got yin and yang the right way around, and so it could be actually quite easy this weekend to just be burnt out because we take things too far. So give yourself some time to relax. Now, one thing I do want to point out about this weekend is the position of the sun, because the sun is in a rather dangerous position, and the problem is Mars and Saturn. And so there is Mars at 21 Leo, there is Saturn at 0 degrees Aries. So you can see by eye that the midpoint of Mars and Saturn is around 10 degrees Gemini. And so the sun is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, but it's more than that. The sun is on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. It is also on the Mars-Aries midpoint. I mean, let me just show you this on the 90-degree dial, just to really illustrate my point. So if we put the sun on the 90-degree dial, there is the Aries point. There is Saturn, there is Neptune. So the sun is right on it. And the sun is also making a 45-degree aspect to Venus. So Venus is additionally on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it might actually be quite a problematic weekend because of these midpoint aspects and the fact that both the sun and the Venus are triggering Mars-Saturn. Now, that may be nothing to do with anything going on a personal level. It may be about what's happening around us, what's going on in other countries, what governments are doing, what kind of events we read about. So it may be okay, but still, for some of us, it could be a frustrating weekend, or even a dangerous weekend if we care to do anything that is stupid or careless. So, do be aware of that configuration with Sun on the Mars-Saturn, Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, we might do something, or people might do something which they really hadn't thought through, and they think it's a good idea. It seemed to be a good idea at the time, and actually it wasn't a good idea at all. So that's something this weekend that we really have to think about. So that's the broad picture. Here's the weekend from the viewpoint of say Sydney, Australia. So as a representative of Australasia, East Asia, there's not a huge amount of difference. The moon is still going to be in Leo, pretty much all weekend. Okay, right at the beginning of weekend, if you're in Australasia, the moon might be in Cancer, but I think by the time you wake up, the moon will be in Leo. And the one thing is that if you are in Australia, probably that sextile between the moon and sun and the moon and moon Mercury is probably going to be more important. And so Saturday might actually be a busier day than, say, if you're in the Americas. But still, you still have that moon conjunct Mars, and that by Sunday evening, that moon Mars conjunction will be exact. So there's not a huge amount of difference between the experience of those of you in Australia or New Zealand and those of you in the Americas. And finally, there is the heliocentric picture. So here is the heliocentric picture. I haven't set it up, so it's always a good idea to just look at what's happening from a heliocentric view, as I always do. So here it is. The Earth is at 10 degrees Sagittarius, And so Mercury is, Mercury, always look at Mercury. Mercury is the important aspect in some respects because Mercury is the fast-moving planet. There is no moon in a heliocentric chart. And Mercury is starting to make a square to Saturn, and that's square to Saturn and indeed a square to Mars. So, by the beginning of a week, we'll probably see a T-square involving Mercury on the Mars-Saturn T. Mars. You've got Mars opposition Saturn heliocentrically, and then you've got Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So that might be what we're building up to. Now, one thing about this Mars-Saturn opposition, I've been talking about this Mars-Saturn opposition for a long time. I'm suggesting there is a Mars-Saturn feel to the times in which we're living. But this weekend we've kind of got double Mars-Saturn. We've got the Mars-Saturn opposition heliocentrically, and then we've also got the Sun and Venus aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So that really does highlight what I said. This weekend could be problematic. As I said, I don't think it's necessarily for us as individuals, but we're just reminded of the kind of world in which we're living. So let me now look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for this weekend, which is the weekend of May the 31st and June the 1st, 2025. Aries. Aries, there are things going on, a lot of action, and you appreciate the fact that the moon is moving through Leo. Aries is a fire sign. We've certainly got planets in this element. Moon, Mars in Leo, got Venus and Saturn and Neptune and Chiron if you're interested in Aries. So a lot of fire, a lot of energy, a lot of action, and the action probably gets more intense as the weekend progresses. So, on Saturday we've got the moon in Leo making a sextile to the Sun and Mercury, and for you, Aries, it's a time when you have got lots to think about, lots to talk about, and also, do think about what matters to you, and what you want to do, and hopefully you have free time over the weekend. Your diary isn't completely filled with tedious events that you don't really want to be there. Well, in such a case, don't. If you don't want to do something, Aries, don't do it. You don't have to. No one's making you. There might be a feeling of moral obligation, but I think, Aries, that moral obligation is not something you should excessively worry about. And Saturday might actually be a time to be making your own plans. What do you want to do? What do you want to sort out? And what do you want to talk about? Because people are interested. And then on Sunday, the moon makes a conjunction to Mars. Now, moon conjunct Mars can be a difficult aspect because it can attract hostility. It can be about arguments. It can be about fighting. It can be about people being desperate to have their opinions heard, and especially with that moon Mars in Leo. Leo is quite an egotistical sign, and so that is a very good reason, Aries, why it's important that you do get your way, that you don't try to do things to please other people too much, because you're not going to be happy about it. Okay, if you and other people are on the same wavelength and you're interested in the same things, okay, well, that's fine. But you do not want to be constrained. And if you are being constrained, if you're doing something you don't want to do, if you're somewhere you don't want to be, then it just may be difficult to hide your feelings of anger. So Aries, it really does matter that you do things your way. And in fact, if you tried to compromise with other people, it wouldn't just be unfair on yourself, it would actually be unfair on other people. Because if you're doing something you don't want to do, you could spoil things. And so let people go their separate ways if they want to go their separate ways, if they have different opinions, if they have different interests. I think that does matter. Now, the moon doesn't just make a conjunction to Mars, it also makes a trine to Venus on Sunday. And that aspect can actually be quite useful for relationships, getting on with people, but in a way that is dynamic. It's not about getting on with people in some sort of emotional, vague kind of way. It's very definite, and it's about excitement. Just remember, there aren't any planets in water at the moment. It's not an especially emotional weekend. Instead, it's a weekend which is more about action. And so, Aries, if you and other people at the end of a weekend have something you want to get involved with, something you want to do together, then things can really move. Sparks can fly, and it's not about making commitments. It's not about making plans for tomorrow. It's not trying to hold someone back. It's all about people being together and expressing their freedom and their mutual respect for each other's freedom. And then in that way, I think that relationships, if they're handled right, by the end of a weekend, can really work. They could even sort of work like the metaphorical house on fire. So yeah, it looks good in that department, provided you don't get caught up in anything emotional or anything like that, because again, it's a bad weekend for anything connected with feelings and emotions. It would just feel unsatisfactory and could, as well as being limiting. Taurus, it's probably a weekend where you want to do things your own way, at your own pace, and you really don't want to be bothered, and you don't want to be interrupted, and you don't want to have to move off your own space. So space does matter, and there could actually be a degree of discomfort coming in. Just you and whatever it is you have to interact with, or you're supposed to interact with, it just doesn't feel entirely comfortable. And the more you have to put yourself out, the more bothered you do feel. And so it's important that you understand the times in which you're living. And when I say the times, that's probably a little bit dramatic. Certainly what's going on over the weekend. You have your own schedule, you have your own space, and it needs to be looked after. And I'm not, though, suggesting that you spend the whole weekend alone with your own thoughts. That might not be a good idea, because it is a weekend, not just for Taurians, when there are a lot of negative thoughts around, and there's a lot of pessimism, and people might have strange ideas about what could happen, and it's easy to fear the worst and to even assume the worst. And Taurus, you could fall for that trap. So if you do find yourself being excessively negative, it's always a good idea to talk to someone and get an alternative view, or to, even if you don't want to talk to someone, well, you can do something different. You can take up a different activity, something you've never done before. But it's got to be about you. It's not about other people. And I do not think that it's a good time to be highly sociable. especially on Saturday. I mean, late on Sunday things do change a bit because the moon is, it's making a conjunction to Mars, and it may be making a trine to Venus, and so with that aspect, by the end of a weekend, then that could be about you and another person and how you are relating to that other person. But you have got a moon conjunct Mars. Moon conjunct Mars is a very stubborn configuration. Moon and Mars in Leo in a fixed sign, very, very stubborn. And you're not in the mood for making big changes. But also, I don't think anyone else is either. But there just may be someone who you can get close to, who you can almost negotiate with, and the right person, the right company, provided it has its limits, may actually be very helpful. So it does matter that you have an alternative view. Especially if you find yourself being excessively negative. Now, if you don't find yourself being excessively negative, and if you just start the weekend, feeling absolutely relaxed and comfortable, then don't make any changes. If it's not broken, nothing has to be done, and just enjoy the weekend, and don't allow yourself to be troubled by extraneous thoughts and worries, because they're not going to help. Now, many Taurians might find that they want to spend all weekend at home, and that might well be the right thing to do. But the problem about spending all weekend at home is that there's a single focus there. It can just be too focused on one thing. And if there's too much focus on one thing, then you might lose touch with reality. And that goes back to what I was saying about negativity. So negative thoughts can lead to more negative thoughts, and you can just go in on yourself, and that's obviously not very healthy or helpful. And again, that's another good reason why you need an alternative view, or why you might need an alternative view. Though, on a positive note, you could say that if you've got something important that you really, really want to concentrate on, and you don't want to be disturbed, then actually it might be a great weekend. Provided you really aren't disturbed, you don't have negative thoughts, you are completely positive, and you believe that it can work. If you give it your best shot, then in fact it can be quite a constructive weekend. So that's the overall picture. I'd like to be more positive, but probably try to avoid making things too psychological. Where there's psychology, there's a problem. And so don't make things too intense, and don't spend ages trying to work out another person's motivations. Don't think that things you see, other people's body language, other cues, don't necessarily believe that it means anything, because there are no planets in water signs. There's only Uranus in earth signs, and you might think it's a good idea to be sensitive, but if you're oversensitive, you could actually trip yourself up and reach the wrong conclusions. Gemini, there is still got loads of planets in Gemini. Sun, Mercury, Jupiter. Jupiter is still in Gemini, but Jupiter is certainly getting ready to leave the sign, getting ready to move into Cancer, and that may not be such a bad thing. So with these planets in Gemini, you have a lot to think about, and you have a lot to talk about, and yeah, once you start talking, there may be no end to it. I mean, on Saturday, the moon is in Leo, is making a sextile to the sun, and it's making a sextile to Mercury. So Geminis have got a lot to say. There are things that they want to talk about. There are things they want to understand. It's always a good idea to understand things. And additionally, the Mercury is moving away from the sun. So when I talked about the astrology for Friday, I mentioned the fact that the sun and Mercury were combust, they were conjunct each other, and they're still combust, but I said that they would have this cazimi conjunction, and I was indicating that might be a problem. You might reach the wrong conclusions. But now that the Mercury is moving away from the sun, it's easier to be objective. You can start to think straight, and things that were disturbing and distracting you are now not such a big problem. They're still there, but I don't think that they're really the problem that they used to be. And now this weekend we've got Moon sextile Mercury, certainly on Saturday, and that is really allowing you to think and to speak, and the things you say could make more sense, and perhaps you're less likely to be confused than you were earlier in the week. And then by Sunday the moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and moon conjunct Mars really does mean that you can express yourself with great force. It could be too much force. Not everyone may be happy with what you say, but at least you're an exciting person. And we haven't just got planets in Gemini, we've got planets in Leo. So that sort of comes together nicely. Gemini and Leo are two signs that have a natural rapport with one another, and so you are an exciting person. Not everyone is necessarily going to like you, but does it matter? You can't be friends with everyone. And additionally, you are going to regard your freedom as, I think, as important, because there is actually a very interesting aspect going on, that Mercury is two aspects going on. Mercury is 15 degrees from Jupiter. You can see it's 15 degrees from Jupiter, so that's 15 degrees is 1/24th of a circle. It's also 15 degrees from Uranus. So it's not just that Mercury is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. It's the fact that it's actually making a micro aspect to both Jupiter and Uranus, and we know that Jupiter and Uranus are in semi-sextile. So this aspect may actually be super good for you. And if we're talking about Jupiter-Uranus, Reinhold Ebertin, in Combination of Stellar Influences, he describes a Jupiter-Uranus aspect as a thank the Lord aspect, or something like that. And he links it with a feeling of relief. There has been a lot of tension. Something has been bothering us. We were worrying about something. And then Mercury on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, there may be just a feeling, suddenly everything's okay. We thought something was a problem. We were worrying about something. And then we realize there's actually nothing to worry about at all. Or it could be, Jupiter-Uranus is about the principle of freedom and wanting to express one's freedom. And so Geminis, of course, want to be free. It's a positive air sign. And so if something has been holding you back, as it might have been holding you back, again, earlier in the week, you might find that you're free, that you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose but your chains. You can get rid of those chains, whatever has been holding you back. Maybe it's not necessarily people holding you back, or institutions or organizations. It may be your own fears, and you'd realize that actually it's okay, and that now sky's the limit, and you need to really start taking advantage of Jupiter being in your sign, because Jupiter is not going to be in your sign for much longer. It is in the process of leaving. So just because you feel excited and enthusiastic and you feel you've broken free from something, doesn't mean you can just relax. There is work to be done, but it's exciting work to be done. So make sure that you really do what is necessary, and that you don't sort of drift off into speculative thinking. Cancer, it could actually be quite a practical weekend. You may feel that there are things that really need to be done of a material, even an administrative nature. And so if you decide that that is the case, then I should say that you should give it your best shot, and you're going to be very good over the course of a weekend about in terms of talking about material things. So if you have to talk about money or some administrative matter, then Cancer, you'll be good at it. The words will flow. You will be as sensitive as is possible. Now, at the moment, there are no planets in water signs, unless you count true black moon Lilith for the North Node. And so you could say that it's not entirely an ideal environment for an average Cancerian. But with no planets in water signs, you could say that could give you an advantage, because you are a sensitive, emotional Cancerian, and you have something that other people don't have, particularly now. And so if you can inject some emotion into proceedings, not too much emotion. It's not a time for maudling sentimentality or anything like that. But if you can show some emotion, I think that would actually be very much appreciated. And that especially is the case when it comes to how you are communicating. I think that on Saturday you are going to be a very effective communicator, because the moon is going to be sextile the sun, and it's going to be sextile Mercury. So you will know what to say, and you will know how to broach difficult subjects, subjects that might have a financial dimension. And so if there have been things that people haven't wanted to talk about, maybe now is the time to talk about it. It may actually be a good thing there aren't any planets in water signs, because people won't take things so seriously on an emotional level. And then, Sunday, we've got a conjunction between the moon and Mars. And, moon and Mars conjunction, that could be about you and your own tolerance of other people's stupidity. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to be meeting stupid people, but you might not be entirely patient, and it might be important for you to get your way. That could matter. And when I think of when I look at the Moon Mars conjunction, I often think of the aphorism of Guido Bonatus. Guido Bonatus was a sort of medieval monk, and he wrote these astrological aphorisms, and he wrote an aphorism about the Moon-Mars contact, and he said something like, the woman is always right, I will warrant. And he was saying, well, don't argue with women. I suppose if you are female, then that would be don't argue with you. If you are male, then watch out for women and don't argue with them. So it kind of perhaps depends on your gender here with this Moon-Mars conjunction. But I think that with this Moon-Mars conjunction, you are going to be really of the belief that you are right. and you're not really going to want to compromise, especially when it comes to things of a material nature. If you're having an argument about money on Sunday, then you're not going to compromise and you're going to insist on getting your way. Do you want to have an argument about money on Sunday? Well, possibly not. But if you feel that something has to be brought out into the open, that Moon-Mars conjunction on Sunday might actually help you. When that Moon-Mars conjunction comes exact, does depend on your time zone. But sometime on Sunday, that Moon-Mars conjunction is there, and it doesn't have to be exact. I mean, in fact, probably all of Sunday, wherever you are, Moon and Mars are close enough to create the possibility of an argument. But if you do get involved in an argument, I'd probably say make sure that you win it. In most cases, Moon doesn't just make a conjunction to Mars; it is also making a trine to Venus, and so that Moon trine Venus is an aspect which is a balance to that Moon conjunct Mars. And that may be that on Sunday, there might be a lot of energy, there might be a lot of potential for argument and disagreement. But if you focus on the Moon trine Moon trine Venus, that may really allow you to smooth ruffled feathers and be able to get through the day without causing World War III. And additionally, Moon aspecting Venus and Mars can be good for relationships, can also be good for getting on with people if there is some common purpose. I know it's supposed to be a Sunday, a day of rest, but if you're working on a Sunday and you're working with people on Sunday, I think that you can actually be very effective, and it may be a good time for reaching conclusions and making decisions about what you want to do, for example, at the beginning of next week. Leo, it is possibly a mixed weekend. And I mean, I think that on the surface, the weekend looks good. The moon is in your sign. I mean, it's great that the moon is in your sign. The moon is making a sextile to the sun. It's making a sextile to Mercury, and it's really making a very powerful conjunction to the moon and Mars, again in Leo. So there seems to be no doubt, Leo, that things are looking good, and this weekend you are going to be powerful, and you can certainly make an impact, and people will listen to you, and they'll certainly take notice of you. So do make the most of it and enjoy other people's company. Especially on Saturday, then Moon making that sextile to Sun, sextile to Mercury. There'll be something about you that's that's relatively easy to deal with. Again, especially on Saturday. Sunday, things do get a little more difficult because the Moon is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. Now, that Moon conjunct Mars may give you a strong sense of who you are and what you want to do, and you may take yourself very seriously, and nothing wrong with that. And you may even find that other people take you seriously, but you could just be a little too aggressive, and even if no one's around, you might just do things in a way that is just too strong. You put too much energy into something, and what you are trying to fix, you break. I mean, that is possible. But right at the beginning of this video, when I was talking about the broad planetary picture, I mentioned the fact that the Sun is conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's also conjunct the Mars-Neptune midpoint. It's conjunct the Mars-Aries midpoint. So that could be a problem, and that may say something about your inner feelings and how you're responding to everything. And Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can actually be rather negative. And you might try your very best to be positive and enthusiastic and looking for action, but still you have your doubts, and there's something you might be worrying about. And when you actually try to make something happen, there could be a feeling of frustration which just comes from nowhere. It may not even be that there is any real frustration out there. It's just your reaction. And so things might not move as fast as you like. And also with Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, you may find that if you're socializing, in theory everything is in place, but other people could be frustrating. Your friends could be frustrating. Your friends, may not be as helpful as they should be, and at worst, Leo, you may find yourself having thoughts which are actually really quite negative. Mars Saturn is a pairing that can be connected with not just frustration, but concerns about death and destruction and imminent doom. I'm not saying anything bad is going to happen, by the way, but there just might still be this feeling of imminent doom, that things aren't moving as they should be, and there might be this worry there. And I think that just in most cases, you need to just accept that this is just a passing phase. We all have feelings of doom every now and then, and we might dwell on difficult subjects. I mean, maybe it's a good idea to dwell on difficult subjects. Maybe you can actually utilize this Sun conjunct Mars on a Mars-Saturn midpoint. There are things that other people don't want to think about, but actually you are prepared to think about. And that might actually be a good thing. Also, Sun is on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, and that is a reminder to be focused. Mars-Neptune can be about distractions. You could get distracted by your own worries, or you could get distracted by things that are not healthy. Could be drink, could be drugs, could be dangerous activities, criminal elements. Mars-Neptune, there is a sleazy feel to Mars-Neptune. So, don't do anything that is dangerous or risky or generally inadvisable with that Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And don't dwell on it. Just because I've said that the Sun is conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint doesn't mean that anything bad is going to happen. It doesn't even mean you're going to have negative thoughts. But I feel that I had to point that out to you, at the very least, because I need to give a complete description, as complete as I can in a few minutes, about what's going on for Leo over the course of the weekend. But this shouldn't take away from the fact that you can be very positive and very dynamic, and you can over the weekend you can actually bring to bear a considerable amount of power. Virgo, you are still feeling that you have responsibilities. You have a responsibility to do things, to make things happen. And this might not sound characteristically Virgo. Virgo has a reputation, probably an unfair reputation, for being sort of fairly cautious and doing things by the book. And it's always good to do things by the book to an extent, but you can exaggerate that. And this weekend, you really shouldn't hold yourself back. And when you think about Mercury, which is your ruler, Mercury has two sides to it. Mercury, there is the careful side to Mercury. Mercury, perhaps as Mercury the bookkeeper. Mercury who wants to organize, and that's more associated with Virgo. Then there's Mercury who is endlessly curious, looking for new things, often associated with Mercury and Gemini. And even though you're a Virgo, I would suggest that this weekend you concentrate more on the exciting side of Mercury, and you look for opportunities and possibilities, and you look for things that are interesting. And it's not just because Mercury is in Gemini. I mean, Mercury is, of course, in its own sign in Gemini. It is because Mercury is making two micro aspects to Jupiter on one hand and Uranus on the other. So Mercury is 15 degrees away from Jupiter. It's 15 degrees away from Uranus. So that means that Mercury is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. And so you've also got Jupiter and Uranus. They're in semi-sextile anyway. And so that really gives you a real boost. And it makes you feel that you want to make things happen, and you can be positive. And if something has been holding you back in the past, then you have a chance to really be able to break free from it. And what are you breaking free from? Anything that has been restricting your freedom of action. And it could be your own thoughts, your own worries. And you may realize that something you thought was a problem isn't actually a problem at all, that it's absolutely fine. And so there could be a feeling of relief. It's not as bad as it looked. And if there's something you want to do, well, actually you can do it. And this also relates to your ambitions. Jupiter is still in Gemini just. And so in the last week or so of Jupiter being in Gemini, Jupiter goes, when does Jupiter go into Cancer? Jupiter goes into Cancer, it's more from, so Jupiter goes into Cancer on the 9th. So yeah, it's just over a week. Jupiter will be in Cancer. So now those couple of degrees of Jupiter in Gemini, really make the most of it. And I think that with this Mercury on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, you can actually start to see what is possible. And so don't slack off, and don't limit yourself, and don't fall prey to negative thinking. And additionally, be ready to do things differently. So over the weekend, while I think it's going to be a good weekend, I don't think it's a weekend where you necessarily have to be here, there, and everywhere, constantly on the move. You can actually be keeping a relatively low profile. And why would you want to keep a relatively low profile over the weekend? Because you've got things to do, because you've got things to do in your own way. There are things you're excited about, or at least there are things you can be excited about. And in fact, if you spent too much time with other people, you might actually lose that sense of excitement. You might have to be burdened with other people's issues, and maybe you just don't want to bother with that. And so it's a weekend where you should be thinking about yourself and your ambitions and what you can do. And in your own way, you realize that there's nothing to be worried about. There's nothing that's holding you back anymore. And so with Mercury on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, which I think is probably the main event of the weekend for Virgos, you can really move things to a new level. Libra, you're certainly in the mood at the moment for exploration, and I've been saying it over the last couple of days. It's to do with the fact that there are a lot of planets in Gemini, and you want to know what is possible, and you're not necessarily comfortable, just staying in one place. And when I say staying in one place, I'm not just talking about geographical place. It's also about state of mind and even belief systems. So being able to move and moving from one place to another. That's that is useful, and we've got the moon in Leo, and so with the moon in Leo, there are plenty of opportunities over the weekend to be doing fun stuff. Maybe you can be meeting with people, and the moon is not just it's making a sextile to the Sun and Mercury on a Saturday. It's making a trine to Venus on Sunday, and so moon trine Venus. That is a great aspect from a social viewpoint. So perhaps Sunday is when the action happens, and from a relationship view, on Sunday you've got moon trine Venus and moon conjunct Mars. So Venus and Mars, the two relationship planets, are being brought together by the moon. So it could be that if you meet different people, you socialize, especially on Sunday, that something interesting might happen. Yet the Sun is actually starting to make a semi-square to Venus, and this Sun-Venus semi-square is it's not exact until next week, but you're maybe starting to feel it. And with this Sun semi-square Venus, there's something that's making you just feel ever so slightly uncomfortable, and you may see that a lot of things are going your way, but still you have an inner negativity. You're telling yourself that something isn't possible, or that something might go wrong, and so as a result you might want to hold yourself back and perhaps not take advantage of a particular opportunity. And so maybe, Libra, you need to work out what that's all about. So negativity doesn't just go away of its own accord. So if you keep having a negative thought, maybe you should start to address it and ask yourself, what the factual nature of it actually is. Maybe it's just about doing some research. Maybe it's just thinking about it, and even talking about it. And there is that possibility that if you're able to have a leap of faith, think beyond your own negativity, you start to realize that your negativity is actually really very trivial and is really nothing, and that in that way the negativity can disappear. But if you do find yourself being negative, do take it seriously, but without giving that negativity power. And taking it seriously means actually addressing the negativity, talking about it, reading about it, finding out about it. And then I think in most cases you'll realize that actually you are worrying about nothing. Scorpio, I don't know what you're planning on doing this weekend. It would be good, Scorpio, if you were going to be doing something that was fairly useful. I think that it can be a productive weekend. Is it going to be a fun weekend? I suppose it can always be a fun weekend, can't it? But is this weekend going to be especially fun? I wouldn't have said so. I don't even think it should be. Fun is for other people at the moment. I mean, it's not that you can't have fun. It's that quite possibly, Scorpio, you've got better things to do. And, that does depend on your circumstances and your situation. But, if you have any chance to do something that is practical and improves your profile, and which of course can also advance your ambitions, whatever those ambitions might be, then I would suggest that you go for it. And one reason I'm saying that is because the moon is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. Now the moon makes a conjunction to Mars every month, but Mars is in Leo. It's still in Leo. Mars in Leo, it's a sign that does work well for Scorpios in some respects, because Leo is a fixed angular house in the Scorpio horoscope, and so it's about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. Now Mars has been in Leo for a long time. I mean, Mars has been in Leo on and off since November, but it's now moving into late Leo. It's not going to be there forever. Mars will soon enough move into Virgo. In fact, Mars moves into Virgo on around the 16th, 17th of June. So that means that the next time the Moon and Mars make a conjunction, it won't be in Leo. It will be in Virgo. So it'll be another couple of years after that before Mars moves back into Leo. So with this Moon-Mars conjunction, don't waste the weekend. There are things you need to do, I think, things that you need to get off the ground, and there are things you need to explore. And don't get worried by anything. There are some things that you might regard as being difficult, too much to handle. You might be wondering, where they're all going. Now, I did indicate previously, I think, was it on my horoscope for Friday or Thursday, that you could maybe benefit from things which other people can't handle. And that hasn't changed. These are forecast. These are daily forecasts, or this is a weekend forecast. But some things don't change. Some things continue for a bit of time. Like Mars and Leo, like the fact that right now you can potentially benefit from things that other people find hard to deal with. You can even benefit from something going wrong in another person's life. I mean, don't feel guilty about it. It can happen. The ways to benefit are many and various, and not all of them are especially pleasant or welcome or desirable, but a benefit is a benefit. And so that might be one way of looking at the weekend, and that would especially be the case if you're involved in some emergency trade. For example, if you're a locksmith and someone has locked themselves out of their house on a weekend, well, that's an example, a fairly trivial example of being able to benefit from another person's misfortune. I mean, it's not a serious misfortune, but that can be something you could do. So this weekend, don't slack off. But I'm not saying you can't have an enjoyable weekend. On Sunday, the Moon is making conjunction to Mars, but it is also making a trine to Venus, and so probably late on Sunday, that can facilitate relationships, can bring you and someone else together for whatever reason. And with the Moon-Mars conjunction in Leo, ideally things happen for a purpose. We're not necessarily talking about anything vague, people just generally randomly bumping into each other. There is a purpose for everything, and there is a reason, ideally, but you can get on with people, ideally on your terms. It's really not a day for, not a weekend for doing what other people say, or spending a huge amount of time trying to placate another person. It's not that kind of weekend, and I think it is quite important, quite important, Scorpio, that you are able to put your own interests first, and that's good for everyone, I think. Sagittarius, there is a lot of fire around. Moon, Mars and Leo. Got Saturn, Neptune, Venus in Aries. We also got Chiron in Aries, if you're interested. And so it's always good when you've got a lot of fire and you feel that things are happening. And so Sagittarius, you don't have to restrict yourself to anything. And if there's something you want to do, something you want to find out about, then now is a great time to be doing it. So that indicates that it can actually be quite an interesting weekend. And also we have got Jupiter making a semi-sextile to Uranus, and Jupiter Uranus semi-sextile, well, it is about freedom and wanting freedom, and certainly you want freedom, and you may have ideas about how you want things to progress, and you might be quite optimistic about it. But Jupiter is your ruler, and if it's semi-sextile Uranus, that might indicate that you have to take into account something you hadn't fully planned for, and it could be about arrangements, something you thought was going to plan and then it doesn't go to plan, and you might feel frustrated and all your big ideas come to grief. Well, it shouldn't be like that. The whole idea about excitement is that it's not structured, and if you try to structure excitement and fun, you try to put it in a bottle, then you lose the very thing that you're trying to achieve. So if something happens that you hadn't thought about, don't get upset about it. You should actually regard it as an opportunity, because it is, it's Jupiter semi-sextile. It's a semi-sextile. A semi-sextile is not a bad aspect. It is kind of a bad aspect, but it's not a bad aspect like an opposition. It's an aspect where you have to accommodate something else, and it's there for a reason. So if something happens that you hadn't planned for, then in fact it's part of the wider plan. And if you can incorporate it, then it'll be great. And additionally, Sagittarius, be careful what you say. There may be a certain tendency for some Sagittarians to use harsh language. Now, as a Sagittarian, you're often of the view, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words may never hurt me, kind of thing. That it's just words, but your words could hurt, or you might find yourself using coarse language. You might even be thinking about using coarse language, and so sometimes coarse language can be effective. Though, if you're feeling that you are being blocked and that you can't get your way and you want something to move, it may be that by using a swear word or by using a very coarse and offensive combination of words, you get a reaction and you get where you want to go. So that is possible, but do think about language this weekend and how you use language and what words you use, how these words come together. Because if you're a Sagittarian, with all these planets in fire, it's just easy to just say something. It comes out of your mouth, and you can't take it back. And Sagittarians do have a reputation for being tactless, and that can be very endearing, your tactlessness, because you don't mean anything. You don't mean anything bad, but sometimes it just happens. So think about the words that you are using, because words actually can be very powerful. And finally, turning to relationships, relationships might be all about the other person. I think that if relationships are something that you want to focus on, then in many respects it's not about you. It's about the other person and what they want. Now, if you are in a relationship where you are in control, where you're exercising too much control, then there could be a problem, because I think at the moment the other person really does want their freedom. They want to be able to express themselves freely. They want to do what they like, and you need to respect that. If you're in a position where you are not respecting another person's freedom, then there could be problems. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that symbolically that is possible. And so give people, the important people in your life, give them plenty of space, and give them the space to express themselves, and give them the space to, be individuals. And that way you could be surprised. And just because someone does something you don't approve of, doesn't mean to say that you should just intervene or criticize them. It might actually be something that you need to learn from. Letting people be free, and letting people express themselves however they feel fit, and that can make for a good weekend, even though if at first you might be slightly bothered by another person's behavior. Capricorn, it's a hectic weekend. At least that might be how it feels. There's a lot of stuff in positive signs. When I say positive signs, I'm talking about the fire and the air signs. And so, we don't really have any planets in negative signs except for Uranus in Taurus. So why is this relevant to you? Well, all things being equal, you're a Capricorn, you're ruled by Saturn, and Capricorn is an earth sign. And so everything going on may be just a bit too much, and you may not entirely feel comfortable with what is happening. And that kind of depends on your general approach and what you're planning on doing this weekend. So, if, for example, you're just on your own, and you're not involved with other people, then it probably doesn't matter. But if you are very much enmeshed with your social milieu, there are people around you, you're going to events, you're trying to be sociable, then it could be a bit of a problem. You might find that things are not just annoying, but other people don't seem especially sympathetic to your needs. And additionally, you might have questions about what they're doing, what their motives are. It may feel that certain people are a complete law unto themselves. They're doing whatever they want. It doesn't make any sense to you, and sometimes you just don't understand something, or rather, you don't have any sympathy, and that's just the way it is. And different people have different views, and you just need to accept that for the moment, at least. And what can you do from a positive perspective? What should you be doing? Well, I think that this weekend you should be adopting a serious approach where other people are not adopting a serious approach. You can go in a different way. You can be serious. You can look at things differently, and you can go under the surface of things where other people can't. And that is perhaps the problem of today, of this weekend, with so many planets in positive signs, in fire and air signs. There is a lack of reflection, and that's obvious to you. But maybe it's down to you to do the reflecting. If no one else can reflect, well, you do the reflecting. You think about it. You think about the consequences of it all. And while you're reflecting, probably it's best to keep quiet. Reach your own conclusions. Then, at a later stage, maybe in a few days' time, when the planetary situation has just shifted a bit, maybe when the moon is out of Leo, when you've got a bit of negativity, when the moon has gone, for example, gone into an Earth sign. When the moon does go into Virgo, well, certainly if you're in the Americas, late on Sunday. But by the beginning of next week, moon will be in Virgo, and things will be more in control, I think. So I'm not saying, by the way, that it's going to be a bad weekend. It just may be a weekend where you just feel that you are different. You're on a different trajectory from most other people. Aquarius, there is a conjunction between the moon and Mars this weekend in Leo, which is of course your opposite sign. And so, this conjunction may say something about relationships. I mean, that's a standard astrology. And as we think about Moon-Mars conjunction in Leo, it may say something about the other person, and the other person perhaps having strong opinions. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Additionally, we could see the Moon-Mars conjunction as a projection, because Leo theoretically is the sign which you are least aware of, because it's opposition Aquarius. And so you could say that with this Moon-Mars conjunction, it might be about anger you feel that you're not fully owning. Something you're annoyed about. You are annoyed about it, but you don't want to admit that you're annoyed about it. And then something might happen and you just can't help yourself. And you might feel that you have to say something or have to do something. So there is this question about whether this Moon-Mars conjunction is working on a real level, on a physical level, or whether it's working on a psychological level. But the issues of who is in control, how anger is expressed, could actually be very important over the weekend. And it is not a weekend where excessive anger is going to get anywhere, especially if it has an emotional content, because there are no planets at the moment in water signs, and so it's not a very reflective weekend. It's not a very emotional weekend, and if one tries to be angry, and if one shows some emotion, then that could well backfire. And instead you should be looking to find some sort of rapport, not just with yourself, but with other people. And the moon is not just making a conjunction to Mars; it's also making a trine to Venus. The moon trine Venus is one of the last aspects that is made over the weekend, and so moon trine Mars may actually allow you to find some way of understanding other people and communicating with other people, and perhaps a difficult situation can be diffused. So that's certainly very, very possible. And additionally, I should point out that not everyone is going to come up with the goods. You know that other people are important, but just because they're important doesn't mean that they're going to be especially useful. I mean, they could be disappointing. So don't expect anyone to do anything. They might try, or they might be quite half-hearted about it, but it just might not work. And so really, Aquarius, this weekend, it might be best that you fall back on your own resources, and your own resources at the moment are considerable, and you have a great sense of who you are and what you can do, and indeed you may feel that there is a bit of a hurry, that if you don't do something, then you might be missing your chance. And one aspect we've got this weekend is a semi-sextile between Jupiter and Uranus. And this Jupiter-Uranus semi-sextile might, Aquarius, say something about your creativity. Jupiter in Gemini, you want to be creative, and you think that creativity is an easy process, and you've understood it all, and you know what you want to do, but then something happens that makes you think again. Maybe it's something from the past, something presented to you by something going on in your home or your family, and at first sight it might seem to be anti-creative, and so you might reject it. But actually, what appears to be anti-creative may actually be completely integral to the creative process. And so just because something is boring, routine and tedious doesn't mean that it's an affront to your creative self. It is actually something that you need to take on board, because creativity needs grounding. And without grounding, creativity is just so much hot air, as you might soon realize when Jupiter leaves Gemini and moves into Cancer. When Jupiter moves into Cancer, that's a very different kind of energy, and things have to be grounded when Jupiter goes into Cancer, at least compared with Jupiter being in Gemini. And this Jupiter semi-sextile Uranus may just be something you realize that you don't want to realize, that you have to take it into account, or else a lot of what you've been working on might have been for nothing. So if something surprises you or even dismays you over the weekend, don't panic. Now, going back to relationships, relationships, you could say that if you want an easy weekend, relationships should be avoided. But if you do find yourself with other people, spending a lot of time with other people, consider the possibility that these other people, that something might be bothering them, that something is holding them back, and maybe they're distracted, maybe they're worried, and maybe you need to find out what's going on. And it is difficult, because this is not a weekend where there's a huge amount of sensitivity flying around. It's difficult to be sensitive. It's difficult to show real emotion, but there are different ways of understanding. And emotion is the emotional feeling side of things is not the only way. You can actually use logic. You can actually logically deduce the way another person is feeling and what is bothering them. And it can be a logical, rational process, and you can reach conclusions. And if you feel that you've finally worked out why someone is doing what they're doing, and you've done it in a very logical way, there's a very good chance that your conclusions are absolutely correct. And as a result of these conclusions, you may be able to take action to improve the situation, and perhaps even to make someone's life better. Pisces, it's a weekend where you don't feel 100% great, I would have said. Not really. It's possibly not one of your better weekends, and you may feel that you're unappreciated. That's a possibility. You might also feel that you're just not on good form, that you're not able to really relate to what's happening around you, and it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the way it is. I mean, you can't always have a good weekend. Of course, I'm not saying it's going to be a bad weekend. I'm not even saying that it's not going to be a good weekend, because you have to remember, these are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and there is a high degree of generalization in what I do. And so I'm just looking at this from a sort of all things being equal viewpoint. And if you try to have a fun, relaxing weekend, then there's a good chance you're going to fail. On the other hand, if you take what you've got, if you take the resources you have, then the weekend should be okay. I think it's a weekend where you can benefit from being pretty straightforward and understanding that there is work to be done, that there's things that maybe need to be organized, and you will be actually a very good organizer. And that's something that Pisceans maybe don't always hear. I mean, Pisceans are often associated with the chaos of the oceans, but in your own way, you can create order, and this order can help in terms of the future and in terms of your own security. You know about your security. Your security is really important to you at the moment. With 3 planets in Gemini, Jupiter still in Gemini. It's only got just over a week left before it leaves Cancer. And, with those 3 planets in Gemini, it's just important to make sure that everything is bolted down, and you don't want anything to get in the way of your peace of mind. And so just go about things in a regular, organized way, but don't overdo it. That is important. For example, Pisces, it's a very bad weekend for lifting heavy objects. If there is a part of your body that might be vulnerable, it could be your back. So watch out for heavy objects. You might think it's not heavy, but it might be heavier than you think. So don't push it. It's all got to be sort of low profile, making sure that everything is how you want it to be, but certainly not a dramatic physical effort. That would certainly be a bad idea. And so that's the kind of weekend you should be aiming for. Just making sure that you're comfortable. It's not, I don't think, about enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment. That doesn't mean to say you can't enjoy the weekend, but I'm just saying that there might be other priorities. And additionally, there may be times when you get annoyed, when if things aren't going entirely to plan, you might surprise yourself with what you say. And Pisceans are quite capable at the moment of using bad language, which is kind of surprising, because today is a day this weekend is supposed to be one where everything is sort of under control, but you can't control everything, and sometimes you might just say something that you weren't meaning to say. Probably best to avoid, but sometimes if you say something extreme, you might get a reaction, but that's probably not something you really want to do. So I'd love to be more positive, but I think it actually can be a positive weekend, provided that you are very disciplined and you understand your limits, and you realize that it's a time when you should be generally looking to stabilize everything. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And what I'm going to do now is look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 24. So if you were watching yesterday's video, for my video for Friday, I had 24 in that video as well. It was the second hexagram, I think. So 24 gives us the idea of return. We have to return to something. We've gone as far as we can, and it's fine. We've made good progress, but we've realized that we really shouldn't be going any further, but it is time to come back, to normalize things. And so that's perhaps what you should be aiming to do at the beginning of a weekend. However, the top line moves, and for this hexagram, the top line can be difficult, and there are a number of ways of looking at it. The top line is perhaps indicating we go too far. We're supposed to come back, but we don't come back. We keep ploughing on. We could actually plough on beyond the point of no return. And given that this hexagram is return, going beyond the point of no return is really bad. That could store up a load of trouble for us. And indeed, the I Ching, one interpretation of I Ching indicates 10 years of problem. It could take 10 years to sort the problem out. And it could be about some initiative we're planning on taking. Perhaps we're thinking about some big, bold initiative. And if we go through with that initiative, it's not going to work out. It's very unlikely to work out. And it could be storing up, a load of long-term problems for ourselves. And another way of looking at it is, there is a point where we can return. And then there's a danger that we miss that point. And if we miss that point, it's too late. I mean, I think, well, I suppose you've got the analogy as, if you're driving a car and your petrol tank is getting really low and you're passing a garage to fill up your tank, you miss it. You decide you're going to go on to the next garage afterwards, and you keep going, and your tank is going lower and lower, and you're thinking, well, can you get to the next garage? And then there is a point where it's too late to turn back, because if you turn back, your tank is going to run out of fuel anyway. So you don't want to miss that point of no return. Now, top line moves, so that does, of course, mean that we move to a different hexagram, and the hexagram we move to isn't so difficult. It's more benign, and it's hexagram 27, which is the corners of the mouth. And the corners of the mouth, it can be about speaking, what we say. It can be about eating, what we consume, and it can also be about how we judge other people, and how we judge other people by what they consume. And so, in the context of the previous hexagram, that there might be the question of how do we decide that when we've gone too far. And it might be that sort of with other people, for example, how do you judge another person? You judge another person by what they eat. What do they enjoy eating? And of course, that's sort of symbolic. Some people are fueled by money or by power, or other people are fueled by generosity. Generosity might be what turns them on, but it could be money, it could be power, it could be something else. And so if we're trying to work out whether it's a good idea to turn back, maybe we should be looking at what makes another person tick, and perhaps realizing that we're in a situation where other people are interested in things that are not healthy. They may be overly interested in money, or something negative, and we realize that this is a bad sign, and then we realize that it is indeed time to turn back. Now, we could just see this additionally simply in a chronological way. We're in a situation, we take something too far, we're stuck, and then what do we do now? We have to think about our resources. So if we go too far, the corners of the mouth is also what we eat. And so if we go too far, there's a danger that we, from a military perspective, if you want to use a military analogy, we have destroyed our supply lines are too long. And so perhaps, because if our supply lines are too long, corners of the mouth is about eating. There's nothing to eat because the place, we're too far from the storage depot. And so we starve. And so perhaps that's another reason why you should think about turning back, because you're overstretched. And so that might be something that you need to think about with this previous hexagram, of return. It's not inevitable. So if you are involved in something, you're getting overly involved in it, you could turn back. The I Ching is not saying you will not turn back. It's just saying, well, if you were to continue on this path, it's not going to be good. So if you can follow that advice, realize that it's something isn't going anywhere, or is too slow, or you're taking too many risks, you're risking starvation, again, not literal starvation, but you're just too far from too far from your supply dump, then the sensible thing to do, it is to turn back, and of course turn back in a timely fashion. There is a danger that you leave it too long, and because there is a point of no return. So let me now go back to the astrology, and I want to start off with the horoscope of Adolf Eichmann. I do look at Adolf Eichmann's horoscope fairly often. But it is a chart that I find interesting, and here is the chart. So he was born March 19th, 1906 at 7:30 p.m. in Solingen in Germany. I don't want to spend a long time analysing the chart in itself, but there are a few things to notice about Adolf Eichmann. So, by the way, he was particularly sort of responsible for the deportation of Jews and others to the concentration and extermination camps, and he was responsible for millions of deaths. And he escaped to Argentina after the war, but he was kidnapped by the Israelis in 1960 and put on trial, and he was hanged in 1962. And this weekend is the 63rd anniversary of his execution. Now, I do have a time chart for Adolf Eichmann, and he has Neptune on the midheaven, which is disturbing. So Neptune, you could say, well, where does he want to go? Where is he going with it? You could also associate that with the executions and the gas chambers, Neptune on the midheaven, unfortunate as that sounds. And then he has got his Mars. His Mars is really interesting because his Mars is on the 8th house cusp, and Mars is in Taurus. And so we associate Taurus with the neck and the throat, and the 8th house is, of course, associated with death, and he was hanged in the first few minutes of June the 1st, 1962. Now, a lot of Nazis were hanged. If you were a Nazi war criminal, that was probably the most common method of execution. Okay, you might have been shot, but hanging was pretty common. A few were beheaded, but hanging was the main one to go for. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in the West, or if you include Israel in the West, he was the last war criminal to be executed, and there was a hiatus there. A lot of the executions of Nazis happened in the 1940s, late 1940s, maybe a couple in the early 1950s, but after that there were no executions, and then there was Eichmann. Now, of course, in the Soviet Union, things were different. Nazi collaborators, Russians who collaborated with the Nazis, were still being hanged up until the late or being executed, or still being shot, probably, up until the late 1980s, almost before communism fell. But so there was something quite unique about this, and yes, he was hanged. I mean, if he'd gone to Germany and sort of been arrested in Germany, he would not have been given the death penalty. But the Israelis got him, and even by Israelis, if the Israelis don't use the death penalty, I think there only have been about 2 people who have been executed in Israel, and Adolf Eichmann is, maybe it's 2 or 3, and Adolf Eichmann is one of them. And when you look at this chart, you also have to ask, was he fated to be a war criminal? I mean, I won't say a monster, because there is a view that it's, we talk with Eichmann, you talk about the banality of evil, and you just say, well, he's just an ordinary, boring person who is just capable of evil, and there's actually nothing especially interesting about it. If you're given the opportunity, and that there is that view, but deporting people and interning people, and in his case interning people and then killing them, was part of what he did. So is there anything fated about that? And the fascinating thing about Adolf Eichmann is that there was another famous person born on March the 19th, 1906, and that person was Clara Breed. I don't actually have a time of birth for Clara Breed, so let me just make that clear, that I don't have any cusps for her. So let's remove the cusps. So Clara Breed, she was born in Iowa, and she was a librarian. She was a librarian in California, and she actually became famous, or really stood out, at exactly the same time as Adolf Eichmann was starting the final solution, with the Wannsee conference. What was she doing? Well, she became, her cause célèbre was the internment of the Japanese, when the Japanese American citizens were being interned in the United States by the Roosevelt regime, and she stood against it. She vehemently opposed it. She sent packages of, I think, books and other things to Japanese children who'd been interned. And so it's kind of weird that Adolf Eichmann followed orders. That's what he did, and he justified what he did by following orders. Clara Breed, you can imagine that would be a very risky thing to do. People must have really been, really hated the Japanese, or at least the Japanese country, after Pearl Harbor. But even then, she was standing out, and I would have thought her, she might have been taking a risk with her job. I mean, she didn't lose her job. She didn't. So that, she wasn't like anything bad happened to her. But as far as she was concerned, it was a risk. Okay, she certainly wasn't taking a risk to her life, but she was taking a risk to her livelihood by standing up. But she did take a risk, and you could say, well, it wasn't just about following or disobeying orders, but she was taking a stand against an established view, against the internment of the Japanese. So this is kind of interesting. I mean, it might just be that it's a different time of birth, but it just does show that 2 people born on the same day are under similar pressures. They are concerned with the same thing, internment, and people being sent to camps, but they respond to that pressure in diametrically opposite ways. So those are a few things about Adolf Eichmann's horoscope. I don't really want to say anything more about it. And then 2 reasons I wanted to look at Adolf Eichmann. Well, 3 reasons, which I find spectacular. Well, I think the Clara Breed connection is pretty amazing. But there was Adolf Eichmann's kidnapping, when he was kidnapped in in Buenos Aires. This took place on May the 11th, 1960, and so it would be interesting to know about his solar return before his kidnapping. So if you look at Adolf Eichmann's solar, if you look at his solar return for 1960, well, what do you take? Now, the way I do my solar returns, I do like to do my solar returns for the place you were born, and to me, that makes sense, because you should not be able to avoid your fate by just deliberately having your solar return in a different place. So here is Adolf Eichmann's solar return for where he was born, in Solingen in Germany. And when you're looking at spectacular solar returns, well, you should really be looking at stuff which is on the angles. And I don't actually see anything angular there. Not really. Part of fortune, well, not really. That's even 10 degrees apart. There's nothing angular there. So it doesn't strike me as being an especially spectacular one. But if we then look at his solar return for Argentina, this is a relocated solar return. So he was working in Argentina. And so his solar return, at the time of his solar return, well, there was a Mars-Uranus opposition at the time of his solar return. So whether you take his solar return for Solingen or Buenos Aires, it doesn't matter. But the thing about his Solingen solar return is that Mars-Uranus opposition is not angular. But here, for his Buenos Aires solar return, he's got Uranus rising, he's got Mars on the descendant, and so that really fits something spectacular happening that year. And indeed it did happen. Within a couple of months of that solar return, he was kidnapped and went back to Israel. And another thing about Israel, so Israel, why Israel? Why is Israel important? And we talk about relocation, and I think I've on the comments section, I've had a discussion about astrocartography, and if you've watched my videos, you'll know that I do astrocartography a lot. But I often use the phrase, well, astrocartography is somewhat hit and miss, and I really do believe that astrocartography is hit and miss. It very often just doesn't work. And with Adolf Eichmann, with his astrocartography, if we want to look at his chart, there is his chart, his regular chart, and he has got you can see that he's got Venus on a descendant. I don't know quite what that says. If you set his chart for Solingen, but he does have Mars on the 8th house cusp natally. We're going to see how important that is just in a moment. But if you relocate his chart for the place where he was executed, which was Ramlah in Israel, so if we do a relocation, we can see that Mars is very close to his descendant. And so remember, he's got Mars on the 8th house cusp in Taurus. So you could say that from his perspective, Mars is the aggressor. It's the people doing things to him, the people kidnapping him, putting him on trial, and hanging him. And so that Mars on his descendant, set for Israel, I think that's quite impressive, and that's a real suggestion that he should have tried to avoid Israel. Of course, he did try to avoid Israel. He went to Argentina, but and it didn't really help. And he went there anyway. I mean, some things you just can't avoid, can you? And then there's the execution itself, and I was born on May the 30th, 1962, just a couple of days before Adolf Eichmann's execution. And I have my Mars at, I think, 0 degrees 50 Taurus. So here is the horoscope for his execution. And so when he was executed, Mars was at 2 degrees 11 minutes Taurus. So if we compare Eichmann's chart with his execution chart, he had a pretty, well, not quite exact, but he had his Mars return. Not just a Mars return, but he had Mars was just crossing his 8th house. And of course, it just says not just the fact that he was executed, it also says something about, the way he died. He was hanged, and the Taurus is about the throat and it is about the neck. And I think that is a really good example of astrology working. Interestingly, another transit he has is he had Venus exactly on the midheaven. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, transiting Venus. Now, you could say that Venus is ruler of his 8th, so 8th house ruler on his midheaven kind of says something about his death, and also it's a very public event. I mean, it would have been I assume it would have been something that was really got a lot of focus on in the news, and so that's those are a few thoughts about Adolf Eichmann. I know I'm repeating myself. I'm not really covering any new material. I have talked about this before, but given it was this weekend is the 63rd anniversary of his execution, I thought that it would be a good illustration of things, and it also illustrates something about solar returns. It illustrates something about relocation. It illustrates something about death, and of course there is that weird connection between Adolf Eichmann and Clara Breed. So let me now transition to Brigitte Macron and Candace Owens. And so here's a chart of Candace Owens. I don't have a time of birth for Candace Owens, and she has put out these YouTube videos relating to Brigitte Macron, and on her Wikipedia entry, she's talking about what she was thinking about Brigitte Macron. She's quoted as saying, after looking into this, I would stake my entire professional reputation on the fact that Brigitte Macron is in fact a man. Any journalist or publication that is trying to dismiss this plausibility is immediately identifiable as establishment. And then she goes on to say the implications here are terrifying. Well, they certainly are, if given what if you take what she says at face value. And so here is the horoscope of Candace Owens. Now, she is a Taurus, and so you can see that someone with Taurus is going to double down on things for sure. And she's got Sun, and certainly got Sun and Venus in Taurus, and her Venus is opposition Pluto. I mean, Venus opposition Pluto, you might see this as reinvention. I mean, she started her life as a journalist as being sort of progressive, as being anti-conservative. Then around 2016, she flipped the other way. And so that might be Pluto, opposition her Venus being, her being able to reinvent herself. And as far as her Mercury is concerned, we don't know where her Mercury is. Because I don't have her time of birth, I don't know whether her Mercury is in Gemini or Taurus. I think I would I mean, I'm wary of saying, oh, she's got Mercury in Gemini. I mean, you might think she has Mercury in Gemini. She says a lot. She is a prolific commentator. And so, the moon, her moon, though, is in Aquarius. and she has got air elsewhere, and in a female chart, as the woman gets older, I believe that she becomes less her sun in Taurus and more her moon in Aquarius. So moon in Aquarius, it's still a fixed sign. We don't know exactly where in Aquarius it is, but she is very focused on what she believes in at the moment. This is not the chart of someone who backs down. Going back to what she said, she talking about staking her professional reputation on particular theories about Brigitte Macron, and but I suspect that Mercury is in Gemini. I think Tucker Carlson has his Mercury in Gemini. Tucker Carlson's his chart. He's got a lot of stuff in Earth. He's got his Sun in Taurus, and but he has got his Mercury in Gemini. But you could perhaps explain it elsewhere. But it is kind of frustrating. But I don't have a time of birth. Another thing about Candace Owens is she has her Mars at 0 degrees Cancer. So that Mars at 0 degrees Cancer is 45 degrees away from Venus. So Venus semi-square Mars. So Venus semi-square Mars, Venus Mars, you could say, that is a woman who is attractive and charismatic, but because it's Venus Mars, people are going to love and hate her. I mean, some people regard her as being compelling and attractive. Some people go have an opposite view, but that Venus Mars is powerful because it's on the Aries point. So Venus is semi-square the solstice point, and therefore semi-square the Aries point, and she's got Mars at 0 degrees Cancer. Mars at 0 degrees Cancer on a solstice point is in a way, it's a very strong Mars. You might say, well, it's a fallen Mars, but still, it's on the Aries point. It's how she relates to the public. So here is someone who does push herself, in the public eye, and she comes over as being a fairly assertive person, maybe even an aggressive person in terms of pushing her views. Now, I did try to look at some synastry between Candace Owens and Brigitte Macron. I suppose the conspiracy theorists would, of course, say that Brigitte Macron was not actually born on April the 13th, 1953, but as I've just said at the beginning of this video, I'm not really into conspiracy theories, and I think that one tries to. Some conspiracy theories, we can see what's happening in Ukraine. We've got a load of lies pushed forward by the mainstream media, so we shouldn't always assume that what we read in the newspaper in the mainstream media is true. But if we say that Brigitte Macron is born on April the 13th, 1953, I don't see a great deal of connections between Brigitte Macron and Candace Owens. No, I don't see any special reason why Candace Owens should be putting so much effort into Brigitte Macron. There is a Taurus feel there. Her Mercury is quite close to Brigitte Macron's midheaven, but I don't really see anything spectacular. Now, going back to Brigitte Macron's chart, now one thing I should say is that when I looked at Macron's arrival in my video a couple of days ago, I put 8 a.m. instead of 8 p.m. So this is actually the correct time for, or not, sorry, it's not the correct, because I don't know precisely when, but I'd put up a morning chart. It should have been an evening chart. Thank you for the commentator for pointing out that mistake. Didn't make a big difference to what I said except for the moon. But, if you're saying that Brigitte Macron was not born when everyone claims she was born. Well, Mars was at the time of that shove or slap or whatever Brigitte Macron did to her husband Emmanuel. Mars was at 1739 Leo approximately. And if you look at Brigitte Macron's horoscope, Mars is at 1732 Taurus. So I mean, that's a very close Mars square Mars. I mean, within what, 7 arc minutes. So I think that's seems to me to be, a good demonstration of astrology working. And as far as I'm concerned, Brigitte Macron was born on April the 13th, 1953, and I'm sure she's a woman, but I'm going to get some negative comments from that. Now, the view that Brigitte Macron is having issues with relationships and with her relationship with her husband Emmanuel is kind of illustrated by her solar return. Now, one thing I just didn't point out in the previous video, and as I've just talked about Adolf Eichmann's solar returns for 1960, well, let's talk about another solar return. And so, when you're doing solar returns, how do you actually work out whether a solar return is important? Well, what you're looking for potentially is a repeated signature. So Brigitte Macron, in her horoscope, she has a Venus-Saturn opposition. And that Venus-Saturn opposition, you could say, well, that is the older woman, a woman who has a husband who is decades younger from her. I mean, that's an interpretation of Venus-Saturn, which kind of fits. And that Venus-Saturn, it's an exalted Saturn. Saturn is exalted in Libra, so she's got this Venus-Saturn opposition. And then when we look at Brigitte Macron's solar return for this year, she has got a fairly close Venus-Saturn conjunction in her horoscope. So we've got a repeated signature. Venus-Saturn conjunction in her solar return, and she's got Venus-Saturn opposition in her natal chart. So it is a very Venus-Saturn time for her. And it may be, in terms of the underlying relationship, well, firstly, it may be under pressure. And I think it really is under pressure. I mean, this is further example, and further evidence, rather, that, that whatever happened on that plane was not just... I think horseplay, as I think Emmanuel Macron described it. It was something more serious. The relationship is in trouble, and it may be to do with the age gap. Maybe now the age gap is becoming more apparent because of that Venus-Saturn conjunction in the solar return. Yeah, that might be what it's indicating, and that Venus-Saturn conjunction is also connected with the North Node. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say. One thing about Emmanuel Macron, and just quickly finishing up with Emmanuel Macron, if you turn to Emmanuel Macron's solar return for his got his solar return here for this year. Let's look at his solar return. So remember, he was born in December, so that would be his last solar return. So Emmanuel Macron's last solar return has Venus on the 7th house cusp. So that suggests Venus relationships are starting to become important, are starting to become an issue. And you might say, oh, Venus on the 7th house cusp, oh, it's good for relationships. But I think in this case, maybe not. And so that's something that I did notice. And additionally, one final point about Emmanuel Macron and his and the 7th house cusp is, we had this shove going on at the airport in Hanoi. And so if we do Emmanuel Macron's astrocartography for Vietnam, so let's just do a map, astro map, and we will do it for Vietnam. So here is the line. See this yellow line here. These are all the places on Earth when Emmanuel Macron was born, when Venus was on a descendant. And there's Hanoi. And so Venus was right on a descendant. If you take Emmanuel Macron's horoscope, he was born for Amiens, but you look at the positions of the planets at that moment, but you set it for Hanoi in Vietnam, rather than Amiens, you see Venus on the descendant. So that is always that potential. And so he lands in Hanoi with his wife, and then we see this incident. And then we also see that in his solar return, he has Venus on the descendant. So I think we do have evidence, looking at everything, that I think the relationship between Emmanuel and his wife is really under a lot of pressure. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.